The story of the little boy who had an enormous head. Once upon a time, there was a little boy with an enormous head. "Oh dear," he said, "what an enormous head I have." One day, he was talking to an elephant. "Oh dear," he said to the elephant, "what an enormous head I have." "That's nothing," said the elephant. "Look at the giraffe's neck." The little boy looked at the giraffe's neck. "Oh dear," he said, "what an enormous head I have." The man who climbed up the tree and his opinions. Once upon a time, a man climbed up a tree. "What are you doing up that tree?" said his neighbours. "Nothing," he said. "People will talk," said his neighbours. "People should mind their own business," he said. So he stayed up the tree. Jemmy and Johnny and Jack and the Beanstalk. Jemmy was little. The trees were big and green. The sky was big and blue. The elephants were big and grey. But Jemmy was little. He cried so much because he was little that the trees cried and the sky cried and the elephants cried, because he was so unhappy that he couldn't do all his crying by himself, because he was too little. It was a wonder that so much unhappiness could fit into such a little person. Then one day Jemmy saw someone who was even smaller than himself. He stopped crying and stared. "Goodness me," he said, "you are little. What's your name?" "My name is Johnny," said the even smaller little boy. "You are the littlest thing I have ever seen," said Jemmy. When Johnny heard this, he was so sad that he started to cry, and the trees cried, and the sky cried, and the elephants cried, because he was so little that he couldn't do all his crying by himself. Suddenly, an even smaller person walked in. "Why are you crying?" he said to Johnny and the trees and the sky and the elephants. "He is crying because he is so small," said Jemmy, who was not crying. Then he said to the even smaller person, "You are the littlest thing I have ever seen. What is your name?" The even smaller person said, "You are the ugliest thing I have ever seen, and my name is Jack and the Beanstalk." Suddenly everybody stopped crying. "What did you say your name was?" asked Johnny. "You heard me," said Jack and the Beanstalk, and walked out. Then everybody started crying again. Why the trees were dancing. Little Lucy was walking on the green grass where the trees were dancing. Suddenly a red bird flew past and said to her, "Why don't you dance, little Lucy? All the trees are dancing." But little Lucy did not dance. She just kept walking on the green grass, looking at the ground. Suddenly a smiling flower opened its petals and said to her, "Why don't you fly, little Lucy? The red bird is flying." But little Lucy did not fly. Little Lucy did not dance. She just kept walking on the green grass, looking at the ground. Suddenly a furry little rabbit scampered up to little Lucy and said, "Why don't you smile, little Lucy? The little flower is smiling." Little Lucy looked up and smiled. She saw all the trees dancing. "Why are the trees dancing, furry little rabbit?" "I don't know," said the furry little rabbit. Susan's bells. Susan had bells on her toes. They were 6 feet high and made a loud clanging sound. The bells were pretty noisy too. "Oh dear," said Susan, "these bells are such a nuisance. The colour does not match my feet." "Then take them off," said Mummy. So she took them off. "Oh dear," said Susan, "these bells are such a nuisance. The colour does not match my legs." "Then take them off," said Mummy. So she took them off. "Oh dear," said Susan, "these bells are such a nuisance. Their loud noise hurts my ears." "Then take them off," said Mummy. So she took them off. "Oh dear," said Susan, "these bells are such a nuisance. They are making my clothes dirty." "Then take them off," said Mummy. "I can't hear a word you're saying," said Susan. The story of the butchers who were cutting up soap. One Thursday, 6 young butchers were cutting up soap. "I have cut my soap into 6 pieces," said the yellow butcher. "I have cut mine into 7 pieces," said the green butcher. "I have planted mine in the tulip patch," said the tallest butcher. "That was a sensible thing to do," said the purple butcher. "I disagree," said the 5th butcher, taking his gloves off. "Personally," said the white butcher, "I think that cutting up soap is a rather stupid thing for us to be doing." But he kept on doing it all the same. The Mother and the Bulldog. "Mummy! Mummy! 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 Mummy!" "Yes, dear?" "You're not my mummy." "No, dear." "Mummy! Mummy! 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 Mummy!" "Ah, shut up, you little brat!" A 27-year-old woman walked out of the grocery shop. She didn't have anybody with her. 6 hours later, a bulldog bit her. The sad story of Sabia. Sabia was a little girl who had nothing to do. She could not collect the eggs because they had all been eaten. She could not ride the ponies because it wasn't Thursday. She could not write in her diary because she had no arms. She could not get dressed because she had no clothes. And she could not go to school because it was Saturday. But then she had an idea. "I know what I will do," she said to herself. "I will look at the newspaper and find out how many W's there are on each page." "Where is the newspaper?" she asked her mother. "I have it," said her mother. "Why do you want it?" "I want to count how many W's there are on each page." "There are 206, said her mother. "I've just counted them." Poor Sabia. Now it was no use counting the W's because she already knew how many there were on each page. Then she had another idea. "I know," she said. "I will find out how many W's there are altogether by counting the number of pages and multiplying it by 206. "You needn't bother," said her mother. "I have counted the pages already. There is 1. 1 multiplied by 206 is 206. Sabia burst out crying. "Then there is nothing for me to do," she said. There was nothing for her to do. The story of the 36-year-old man who climbed into a big box but who was unable to climb into a smaller box inside the first box into which he climbed. A man who was 36 years old climbed into a big box. Inside it was another box. "I will climb into this other box," said the man. But it was too small for him. Naughty Tommy. As there is only a conceptual and not a real distinction between characteristics and the existence united with them in an existing thing, it may be objected that if an infinite being excludes the characteristics of finite things, then it must also exclude the existence of finite things, and so cannot be the source of their existence. However, the objection is not valid, for an infinite being does not exclude the existence of finite beings qua existence simply, but only qua existence united with characteristics, said Tommy. "Be quiet and stop arguing, Tommy," said his mother, "or I'll send you to bed."